Are you tired of working on the same writing project and just trudging through the muck trying to get it done? Do you just think about other projects, other things you could be doing outside of the book series you've been writing for the last, 5 years, 6 years? Well, there's a few solutions to that. And I have one remedy that might make things better. Hi everyone. I'm James, an author, editor, and the owner of The Arcanist, an independent publisher dedicated to sharing excellent fantasy fiction. This is The Morning Edit, the show where you and I sit down with a cup of coffee and talk about all things fantasy publishing, especially from the perspective of the independent author. If you want to hear more from me, The Morning Edit is a podcast before it is a YouTube video. Sometimes the episodes are also videos like this one here, but most of the time I am just sitting down and talking. Before we get started, remember that my novels are going to launch on Kickstarter soon. If you want to support what I do, following that Kickstarter is the best way to support me. It is going live in November. It is coming up fast. Probably faster than I'm ready for. I keep setting deadlines and I'm not ready for them. But today we are talking about crop rotation. And I'm not really talking about farming, nor am I talking about gardening. I'm talking about writing. Crop rotation is a term that I've absorbed through the zeitgeist, through a photosynthesis of information. I'm not sure where it originated. I've heard people credit the method to Brandon Sanderson, but when I looked up Brandon Sanderson crop rotation, I found nothing. I have no doubt that Sanderson employs this method to great effect. I mean, the man pumps out books like crazy. But I haven't found anything about where this originated. So if you know, drop it down into the comments or send me an email at james@jamesdmills.com. By the way, if you have a question, I will answer the question on the show if you email me. Crop rotation might have some community-defined definition, but I'm going to talk about what it means to me and my process and how it might help you and your process. So the basis of crop rotation is that you're going to put yourself on a schedule and you're going to switch things up at predefined intervals. What do I mean by that? When I first started writing, I focused in on singular giant projects. And while this is a separate talk altogether, I do feel like if you're a brand new writer, the last thing you should be doing is deciding to write a book, and even worse, writing a series of books. Those are big projects that take a lot of skill, a lot of discipline, and a lot of planning that you haven't learned how to do yet when you're brand new. This is the mistake I made. It's the mistake every single one of us makes. We start a fantasy series and it's book one of whatever. And what usually happens is book one will never come to light, or book one will get published and you'll wish you have done a million things differently, and then you have 2-3 years between book one and book two. I call it the infinite book one syndrome. It is something that I have been trying to weed out of my life. This is a bad thing because readers, I'm one of these readers. I will not read your fantasy series, for pleasure. I'll read these all day for work, but I will not read a fantasy series if it's incomplete. We've been burned by George R.R. Martin, folks. I watched the whole Game of Thrones show from age 14 to 21, and then I'm 26 now. And I read the books years ago. It's what got me into writing. I've blossomed a whole writing career from beginning to professional. And George R.R. Martin still hasn't released the book 6. We've been burned. We've been burned. We don't want fantasy series or any series that aren't complete. Does that mean you shouldn't write a series? I mean, that's up to you. I have decided to do things differently. And a big part of that is crop rotation. So those are the business reasons, but another reason why you might want to crop rotate and work on separate things are because you get bored. Shiny new object syndrome is something I hear people talk about on the internet all the time, and it's really not that big of a problem if you know how to manage your time and your projects and actually get things done. There's no problem with starting on something new if you have the discipline to put things in a rotation. So when I first began writing, I started writing What Lies Below, which is my first book that I've ever written. It's the first book I've ever rewritten. I've done countless edits on it. I've split it into 2 books, and now I'm rewriting it for the second time. We'll get into that. But when I was a new writer, What Lies Below was my project, and then but before What Lies Below, I had written a big, long, short story that never saw the light of day. It's not a good story. Started out 10,000 words plus. I've whittled it down to 5,000 words. I've changed it from third person to first person. It's just not a good story. It was my first attempt at writing a short story, and it wasn't even short. And then I started on What Lies Below. I had an idea for a book. I wanted to do it. I started writing on it. And that was the first time that I really, I wrote a first draft from beginning to end. And that was a big milestone for my learning. The problem is when I started school for writing, which I don't recommend you do, but I did a creative writing bachelor's degree at Southern New Hampshire University. It was an online program, which means you get out of it what you put into it. That's what I love about online programs, right? If you don't put in the effort, they're worthless. They don't do anything for you. You're not going to learn things through osmosis. Learn things through osmosis. That's what I was trying to say earlier. Oh my goodness. But I put a lot of effort into that program because it's what I wanted to do. It's what I thought my life would be filled with. It's where I thought my career would be. And at the end of the day, that program got me an undergraduate degree, which qualifies me for grad school, which I'm starting soon. And it made me a really good writer. It introduced me to other really good writers who I work with to this day. One of those is Lee Patton. A Valley's Shadow is coming out on Halloween just in 2 weeks, folks. Oh my goodness, it's available for pre-order now on the Arcanist web store. I highly recommend you check it out. And if you don't want to buy the book, you know what? It's free on our website. We have something for everyone. I'm not going to hold you back from reading the book. Hell, honestly, pirate the damn thing. I don't care. Just read it and leave a review. Anyway, so there was a lot of good things that I learned in my undergraduate degree, and one of those things was project management. Yeah, I was working on a book the whole time, and if you do go to school for writing, I highly recommend you don't stop writing your personal projects. Keep writing your personal projects while you're going to school. But while you're going to writing school, you're obviously going to be required to write things for school. What does that mean? Well, in my degree, it meant short fiction. I became very, very good at short fiction. I've learned a lot about short fiction, so much so that it's my whole entire side hustle is the Arcanist magazine, which peddles fantasy short fiction. And this is another talk too. Short fiction is the future, folks. Minds are dwindling, attentions are dwindling with phones. We can battle it all we want, and I do in my personal life. I try to rip myself from the digital tether, but the first rule of marketing is meet people where they're at. Short fiction is easily read on the toilet instead of scrolling through TikTok. Just let that seep in. Going through school, working on your personal project, working on the short fiction projects that come out through the classes, and there were some classes where I was able to use parts of the novels I was working on in the workshops. It really depended on the teacher and the goal of the class. So it's a lot of different things you're doing at once, and I found that to be a very healthy balance for me. I am a person who enjoys variety in my life. When I was a young buck in the professional field, my job was to travel from place to place fixing copy machines, cash recyclers, really any digital office device that wasn't a computer. I was going out and fixing it within a 300-mile radius of my house. And while that job sucked for the company that I worked for, I actually really enjoyed field service to where I did it at 2 other jobs after that for different things. Some of them were repairs, some of them was auditing or things like that. But that spice of life, that variety, not really knowing where you're going to go every day, but doing things that you're familiar with, I like that a lot. I get really bored and melancholy if I'm just going to the same place every day, doing the same thing. And that's kind of what I do now at my role, but my job is also so broad. Sometimes I am still traveling, and sometimes, I might be. Yesterday I was configuring a server. A couple weeks before that I was editing a newsletter for the company. Earlier this week, I had driven an hour and a half out to install a printer. Other times I'm repairing desktop computers. Other times I'm sitting and looking at a terminal all day and trying to fix network problems. It really just depends. You know, it's a small company. And well, why does that relate to writing? Well, writing is the same way. What I discovered writing my book and also writing short fiction on top of it is that, man, I don't want to write this story for the next 10 years of my life. What Lies Below is originally intended to be a book one of 4. I always saw it as 4 books for some reason, but the big fantasy book in the big fantasy series, it was supposed to be just like that. 600 pages. I think this is the only one that will ever exist of this at this point. I've shown this in other videos when I was on a kind of a different track and before I reoriented myself to what I'm doing now. But this is about 450 pages. It's a pretty beefy book. You know, it's not a 6x9. I believe it was 130,000 words. It's the longest book I've ever written. Also the worst book I've ever written. And that's okay, because it was the first book I've ever written. And if your first book is the worst book you've ever written, then you're on the right track. That's why Ashen Rider, my second/third book, depending on how you count a single book that got split in half along the way, that is the best book I've written thus far, and that's why it's coming out first. Your first book that you publish is what you get judged by for the rest of your career. So Ashen Rider goes out first. I started working on Ashen Rider because I was crop rotating in school. I approached a workshop where the goal was to start a novel. It was a 2-part workshop. Unfortunately, it had 2 different professors. One professor was really good and really encouraged me with the concept of Ashen Rider, which is kind of weird, and took a lot of polish and, practice for me to get right. A lot of rewriting, a lot of editing, a lot of feedback from different people over a few years. The second class, I worked on another part of Ashen Rider at. The professor told me it was unpublishable. The words exactly were, "I don't know an editor in their right mind who would publish this." Well, they're probably right, so I'm the editor in their right mind who will publish it. It's my own book. I can do what I want. But the contradictory thing about working on all these things at once is at first it's like I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. What Lies Below, I'm going on year 4 or 5 of working on it now that I've committed to rewriting it again. But Ashen Rider, I think its production cycle is really only 2 to 3 years, depending on how you count it. I mean, I had the idea years and years ago, but I didn't actionably start writing prose about it until 2023. Started out as a bunch of short stories, and then I rewrote the short stories, and it's eventually come to where it is now, which is a whole book serialized for online reading, but then to become a book later. I think it does both pretty well. And these production times are getting shorter because I'm learning, part of learning to be a writer is learning your process. How do we create things? And I've decided that the way I create books is to create a first draft. Here, this hand's better. Create a first draft. Rewrite the first draft after a week to a month-long break. I call this the brain break. Your brain solves a lot of problems when you take some distance away. It's working in the background. It's very powerful. I've talked about this in the past. So take a break from the first draft, then hit the second draft hard. I always find rewriting to be the most enjoyable part of the process because rewriting is where I get to see some lousy crap turn into something firm and artistic and cool, right? I'm never happy with first drafts, and I don't think you should. The challenge with the first draft is to allow yourself to just be bad and not have to fix it right away. It'll be fixed in the rewrite, and then you have editorial passes after that. That's where things get fixed. So ideally, we have the first draft, we have the second draft, which is a rewrite, and then we have a third draft, which is a revision. And then you send it to editorial for your main developmental edit, then your copy edit, and then your proofread. That's 6 drafts in total. This can go up to 7 or 8, depending on how many times you rewrite the damn thing. Well, all that can get really exhausting. That's a lot of steps to do. I don't like blocking out a year of my life and saying, I'm going to work on Ashen Rider this year and get it out. I like to block out weeks. I don't just want to write books. I just told you that short fiction is the future. I like to write short stories, and I wrote more short stories this year than I think I've written in my entire career prior. This is only possible if you crop rotate. So when I'm working on a book, this is what it looks like. I'm scheduling my calendar. Maybe I'll put a screen cap of my calendar up there. That might actually be helpful. I'm going to do that if you're watching. If you're not watching, you're listening on audio, imagine a calendar and lines across it. I'm going week by week. I'm going to spend a week on a story. I like spending 1 week on one short story. This is a habit I developed at the beginning of making videos. I started this story a week series that I never ended up continuing, but I did continue the practice of blocking out a week-long period to write an entire short story. Sometimes you don't finish the short story. I've done this now, I think 5 times. I've done this 5 times this year, maybe more, where I focus on a short story for a week. And 4 out of those 5 times, I have created a first draft, revised it, and rewrote it if necessary. I don't always rewrite short fiction. It's easier to get that on the page for some reason for me. The other part of it are books. I have worked on 3 different books this year. One of them is going to be published in December at Sash and Writer. It's done. Another set of them, I guess technically 4 books I've worked on because I've split one in half. Those, What Lies Below and its partner, Those Left Behind, is going to be published over the course of next year. And I'm in the process of rewriting now, so there's quite a bit of editorial that needs to be done before it is ready. The 4th book is my 4th book, Phrygian Nights, which was a big 3-week project. So these books are usually in 3-week chunks. I find that I tracked this with journals. One of my podcast episodes, I think the last one, talked about journaling a project and how beneficial that is. But I found through the data that I collected on myself that week 2 is the most productivity, and then that's kind of the climax, and then I start going down. Week 3, those 3 weeks are my highest motivation, and then by week 4, that's usually where life is starting to be like, hey, you got to focus on other things again. So, I'll go from 10,000 words, 15,000 words, 9,000 words, 900 words right there at the bottom of that valley. So 1 week, 3 weeks, also a rest week. And a rest week doesn't mean don't write. It just means write if you want to. And I like to take those rest weeks to write poetry. My only publication this year was a poem. I am shortlisted right now for, I don't even know if I can say, I didn't sign an NDA. I'll just say it. I'm shortlisted right now for a story with Savage Realms Monthly. I would love to be published by a big magazine like that. And then I just was shortlisted for New Edge Sword and Sorcery, and unfortunately didn't make the cut between the other shortlisters. So those were 2 of the stories I had written during the crop rotation. So I have more things going out than I really ever have. I have poems going out. I have short stories going out. And when I started this year, I wanted to receive 100 rejections. And I'm not going to get there, but I'm a lot closer to it than I've ever been because I'm rotating. I'm keeping my writing brain primed, and really that's where this all comes in. When you're working on the same project over and over and over, day in and day out, you are going to lose motivation. And yes, motivation isn't everything. Part of the writing life is writing even when you don't want to. But writing when you do want to is pretty important when you work a full-time job. Writing isn't my job. It doesn't put money on the table. It doesn't put food on the table. If anything, writing is costing me more money this year than it ever has. So I have no real incentive to put something out into the world right now. I get to do things at my own pace because none of you are paying my bills. And that sounds kind of brutal and maybe a little rude, but it's true. I don't put these videos and these podcasts, I don't write fiction or books. I don't write it to make money off of it. I write it because I love the craft and I want to help you all love the craft too. And part of loving the craft is keeping the element of variety in it. So this isn't to say go off to whatever your whims desire. Don't just ditch your book because you had a better idea. The key here is to keep coming back to it. Action Rider, I've worked on in chunks, and I've only recently started the regiment, the calendar, blocking out weeks. It's only been in the last few months. But Ashen Rider was kind of crop rotated intrinsically. I started it in 2023, writing these stories, and then I put it down for a while, picked it back up in 2024 when I was doing those fiction workshops, put it back down for a while, it was getting intimidating, brought it back up to finish the first draft, put it down, brought it back up to do the rewrite, which was also in 2 crop-rotated segments, and then the editorial has been in crop-rotated segments as well. And Ashen Rider is done, and in between all those segments, I also have short stories that were going out. I have other books that I've been working on. Phrygian Nights has about 35,000 words in the first draft right now. My target was 40,000 because I prefer shorter books at this point in my life. And I'm thinking it might end up being more to 50 or 60,000 words. But I have half of a first draft written in 3 weeks, and that's pretty good. It's nothing to scoff at all. And, when I return to Phrygian Nights next month in November, right now I'm working on What Lies Below, on that rewrite, I'm going to go and I'm going to finish the Phrygian Nights. And these things are just going to start rolling. I'm seeing more consistent releases, more consistent products being finished. I know it seems like right now I haven't really put anything out book-wise. And that's because, you got to take your time with books. Short fiction, I have been putting out a lot. Though I haven't been having a lot of success in traditional publishing, I frankly just don't spend very much time with it. I'm not very interested in the literary magazine community, which I know is kind of ironic because I'm an editor for a literary magazine. But mine's kind of a counterculture to that hoity-toity, super pretentious stuff that I see all the time. It drives me freaking crazy. I've put out a lot of short fiction with The Arcanist. Every time we release a issue, a couple of the editors have stories. I've made sure to have a story of my own in there as well. And we do the serials in-house. So if you go on our website, you will see the Spotlight story the second week of the month. That is a random author who sent a really good story. Sometimes it's people we've worked with in the past. But all of those people who sit in the spotlight are people who are outside of the staff. I guess sometimes that isn't the case because I think Lee Patton has a story coming out in November that's going to be a spotlight. But that's 1 out of 12 spots that were a staff member. And then in the last part of the month, we do a serial chapter. And that's how Ashen Rider has been released. My book's out there. It started with The Scarlet Chair, which is a short story that you can listen to here on YouTube. So I've gotten more work done than I ever have. And that's because of crop rotation. This has been a really long-winded and kind of conversational way to do it. Maybe down the line I'll do one of my more traditional structured, researched videos where I share some data involving it, but I've recorded data in my own life, and I know that that's anecdotal, it's not scientific, but we're also writers. Being empirical isn't the most important thing ever when it comes to the humanities. I always feel crossed between, should I be, looking up studies? Should I be including sources? Some of my videos are really heavily researched and full of sources. Other ones are just my opinions. I think that's just a reflection of my dual concentration in college between the arts and science. Science is great, it really is, but also it gets in the way of art sometimes, in my opinion. So, that's all to say, crop rotation has been very beneficial for me. List out your projects, and give yourself periods of rest in between those projects. And I guarantee you, if you are doing things in 3-week chunks or 1-week chunks, you are going to get short stories written, you're going to make progress on your books, and you are going to not feel burned out on them. That's all I have for you today, folks. Thank you for watching and sticking with me. I'm sorry that I've been absent for a while. There have been some challenges in my life that have made it very hard to keep up with the digital sphere, but I am mostly back. I'm planning a very hard video campaign, we'll call it, in January. There's data that suggests that people like to start new skills in January because of New Year's resolutions. So I think that is the perfect time to create a series on how to become a writer, because it might be a lot of your guys' first time thinking, I'm going to be a writer. So I'm going to do a 4-video series, 1 video every week, talking about how to become a writer and to write, how to live the writing life. That'll be coming in January, so I might be a little quieter here. But in the meantime, I'm going to be talking with a lot of authors. I have talks from Courtney Jensen and Lee Patton that I haven't combed through yet and released. You're definitely going to be hearing more from them. Those are some of my favorite people to talk to, so I think they should be some of your favorite people to listen to if you like listening to me. I'm also going to be talking with a couple of other authors. Some of them work with the Arcanist, some of them do not. But yeah, about 4 different guests coming onto the channel, so you might be hearing a lot more from this channel and hearing from a lot more people. I'm also working through the Ashen Rider audiobook. I've already started it with that Scarlet Chair video that I told you about that, like I said, it totally flopped, but that's not why it's there. It's there as an archive. Eventually, the entirety of Ashen Rider will be available as an audiobook for free on this YouTube channel, and if you want to listen to it, they'll be in different videos segmented the same way that they are on the online publication. My goal is to I don't want any barriers to my fiction. I don't need you to buy my books. I don't even think I want you to. But if you would like to, if you want that hardcover, if you genuinely like what I write or just like me and want to help me out, going to store.thearcanist.net and buying anything on that website is one of the best ways to support, and the very best way to support is to follow that Kickstarter coming in November and clicking follow. And when you get the email to go on the Kickstarter in the first 24 hours and purchase the tier that works for your budget. There is something for everyone there, and that stuff goes directly to helping me print those books and ship them off, and also funding the Arcanist so that I can help other authors. Kickstarter is going to be a pretty big way that I fund these projects going forward. With that, folks, keep writing. List out your goals, list out your projects, and put them on the calendar. Don't work on something for more than 3 weeks. Don't start tearing your hair out because you're sick of it. Just take a break, work on something else, and come back to it when you're refreshed. With that, I'm James Mills. Thank you for watching or listening. And have a wonderful day.